You figure it out?
All set.
Yeah, I'm Brie Schmidt with Second City Real Estate and the managing broker. Also one of the co-founders of the Midwest Real Estate Networking Summit, which is coming up July 25th and 26th. So what we'll be talking about today, I said the last, 8 to 10 years of real estate has really been about buying, and there hasn't been a ton of selling. So I sold 14 properties in the last 12 months and wanted to maybe talk about why I sold the properties and how I got to that process. So like the Midwest Real Estate Networking Summit, I presented at the Mid-Atlantic Networking Summit in, was it April of 2018? And a speaker came up on stage. He was an economist. And it was, 7 o'clock in the morning, first thing in the morning. And he's talking about all these big words I didn't understand. So I'm writing down like yield curve and what this means. Because like while I understand local real estate markets, I don't understand the general economy and how that impacts real estate on a national level. So at the end of the event, they did a charity auction where each speaker gave up a few hours of their time, and then all the proceeds went to charity. So when that economist came up, I obviously wanted to bid on him. I wanted to pick his brain and understand, more of a broader scope of economic triggers, what I should be looking at, how I should be understanding my portfolio. And one of the great things he did for me was he went through my entire portfolio and threw out all these different numbers and calculations, and then talked me through what I should do with my properties. So one of the reasons I was considering selling was that it had just gotten to be a little bit overwhelming. We had 96 units, a lot of drama dealing with C-class assets in the Milwaukee market. It's always something with tenants. Some tenants always not paying or moved out in the middle of the night. And after, 6 years of that, it starts to wear you down a little bit. So that was one of the reasons. But the second reason was that the property values had increased. So I really wanted to understand, like, if I'm going to sell some properties, which ones should I sell and why? So one of the things he did, he asked me for the last 5 years of all my cash flow numbers. I use Buildium for my property management. Luckily, that was a super easy task to be able to pull those reports for him. And when you're, I always do end of the year reporting, obviously, but I never really looked back at like a 5-year chunk or a long-term chunk to understand, we might have had a bad year with property A, right? But I didn't really realize that like 3 years ago was also a bad year, and 5 years ago was also a bad year. So when I look at it, the grand scheme of things, that property wasn't the best performer. So I'll give you an example. I had a property that I bought with 20% down. So my cash that I put into the deal was $12,000. And on average, over the last 5 years, I was cash flowing $3,000 a month. So I was getting a 25% cash on cash return. Sounds great, right? I paid myself back in 4 years. But if I sold that property after all my taxes and capital gains and all that, I'd profit $25,000. So the way that we looked at it was, how many years of cash flow will I get up front by selling? And at what point is that number, what's the trigger point for that? So we went through, so I've got 31 different properties. We went through all of them and analyzed what's my IRR, what's my annual cash flow. We looked at things like, this had a really large one-time CapEx that affected the cash flow. Let's take that out and assume that that's a one-time expense, and look at, what's your average annual cash flow in normal operating conditions. So the number for me, the first number was 10 years, right? If I could sell this property and get 10 years of cash flow up front, adjust this, sorry, then that's going to be a good thing for me. Where the 10 years came from, I don't know. It just made sense. I always thought just, if I can get 10 years up front and just reinvest that, I'd be in a better position. So I had a few properties where I didn't realize like my cash flow was awful. I would get like 20 years of cash flow up front by selling right now. So those were the first properties I sold last summer. I also have 3 partners. So of the 31 properties that I own 10 with partners and I own 21 myself. So I just sold my properties and then kept up with my partners about like, hey, I'm doing this analysis. This is what I'm seeing. These properties are going for asking price or above within a matter of like usually the first weekend. So when we went to go reevaluate 2020, I went to all my partners and put together like a prospectus, I guess, of, hey, this is where our cash flow's been. This is where we'd be at if we sold. This is what our profit would be. Like, what do you want to do? So I have one partner, we'd only one property. He decided to sell. My other partner, we had 4 properties. He decided to sell them all. And my other partner had 5 properties and he decided to sell 1. So I actually ended up liquidating 2 of my partnerships throughout this process. So I sold, of the 14, I sold 5 last year and I sold 9 this year. Luckily, before Corona, we were at least under contract, inspection done when Corona had happened. And we were a little bit concerned because if you remember back when it all started, everyone was talking about no one's going to be able to get loans. Funding is being pulled out. We only had one delay, and it was a 3-day delay with a commercial loan where they got overwhelmed with the SBA loans and asked for a 3-day extension just because they had to get documents from underwriting. So then I had to do my capital gains calculations and start paying the IRS my anticipated capital gains taxes, which sucks, by the way. That's also a big point. So if you own property even longer, I own these properties for about 5 or 6 years. I've got 2 properties in Chicago that it makes total sense financially for me to liquidate those properties. They're steady cash flowing, but I could really reallocate that capital into a better investment opportunity. The problem though is my capital gains is so large on it. I would owe over 6 figures of capital gains tax by selling. So that was part of the analysis too, is figuring out, hey, at what point do you keep them? So for those 2 properties in particular, I would definitely do a 1031. I just haven't found an opportunity that's worth it to really analyze if that's going to be my strategy moving forward. For the time being, they're fine. They're easy to manage properties. Those are some of my Chicago rentals that are more A, B type class properties. But yeah, so one of the things that I now suggest to people is to not only just look at we reflect every year, but start reflecting every couple of years, looking back and seeing, where's the downfalls, because there's certain properties that I've had where every 12 to 18 months, there was some sort of dramatic problem. And no matter what we did over a 5-6 year period, it just kept happening. It was one thing after another with these properties. So it just made sense for us to get rid of them. We had a particular property that had a really bad bed bug issue. And it was apparently the worst bed bug situation that 4 different pest inspectors have ever seen. The tenants is a duplex, and the top floor tenants just refused to do any sort of treatment. And after 6 months, the bed bugs had gotten into the walls, and we had to vacate the entire building. We had to do a heat treatment. We thought we were good. We had new tenants move back in. Bed bugs were still there. We had to vacate the tenants again, do another heat treatment, let it sit for 3 months because there was still bed bugs in the wall, do another heat treatment, and then we actually had to pay a employee of our property management firm to come spend the night in the building to see if they got bit by bed bugs, because that was the only way we could know. And we took total, that building for bed bug remediation cost us $8,000. And so while we had gotten the building up and running again, it just made sense to liquidate it and cut our losses. That was the only way that we were going to break even anytime soon with that property. So that was another example of, what, we're done with this, let's move on and start fresh. So now I'm looking for new opportunities. Now I've gotten the cash, I have taken all the tax hits from it, and now I'm looking for new opportunities for investing. I'm not sure residential rentals, just because I've had so many of them. I want to diversify my portfolio. So looking at different assets, potentially, I really don't know, maybe small business assets, something a little bit different. There's a local junk removal company that I'm really interested in investing in, something that's service-based, recession-proof, but that's where I'm really spending my time currently. So I'll open it up for questions. You want me to keep going about, I'd like to answer some questions on the topic.
Why don't we do some questions and answers? If anybody could just in the chat function, if you could ask Brie your question there, that's probably the easiest way, or just say you have a question.
John, I have a question. Is it okay if I ask, or do you want me to type?
jump in, whoever that is, but we can barely hear you.
John, can you hear me now?
Yeah, much better.
Brie, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. So, question. This is a new. I haven't even thought about it. So, so you bought a property 5-6 years ago in Milwaukee, correct, with 20% down. And I'm assuming since you liquidated that buy and hold in 5 to 7 years, it would typically be a commercial loan, correct, from a community bank, credit union, or a private lender, correct?
So yeah, my loans were all through. So even though I was buying residential assets, meaning 2 to 4 unit properties, because I was buying an LLC, they were all commercial loans. So the bank that we use was US Bank, which is a regional bank.
Awesome. So when you bought this rental property, did you have it in the plan that you would get rid of it in 5 to 7 years? Or
No.
did that come because the market changed rapidly? Were you trying to, because my belief is if you take care of real estate for 5 years, real estate takes care of you for the whole life, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And when I look at a rental property, I look to, buy and hold for 30 years, at least, I'm 34, another 30-35 years, I would retire and I would have, cash flow coming in from all these rental properties. So, I just wanted to make sure that I'm on the right path when it comes to, buy and hold rental properties.
I think it just depends. Said for, I had no intentions of selling, but when I looked back and reflected on the actual numbers, that there was a handful of properties that, hadn't been performing to where I expected them to perform. And if I sold them, I would get 20 years cash flow up front. So why would then I could reinvest that money into something else. So why would I hold them when I could sell them after taxes and capital gains and get that much cash flow up front and then reinvest that money into something else? So that was my thought process on it.
Got it. Yeah. I typically, what I do is I have around 40, 45 doors, in the last 2 years. I've done serial house hacking. I've house hacked 4 or 5 times. So that adds up.
It's a
And
lot of house hacking.
yeah, it's a lot of moving. So
There's a lot of moving.
yeah, I could basically own a moving company one day.
Right.
But yeah, but I do a burst strategy where I get all my
Mhm.
cash invested in the deal in 6 months. I do a refi. I have a W-2 job, so I can get a residential Fannie Mae Freddie Mac backed mortgage at least for 20 properties. Correct. So that's where I think my returns are, basically infinite. If I can get all my cash out in 6 months, then I
Yes,
could basically,
it
hold it
totally
for,
depends.
yeah.
I sold 14 of 31 properties. So there's other properties where, the cash flow is very strong on, even though the properties have appreciated in value, it doesn't make sense. So like I looked at it as anything over 10 years, I definitely sell. Anything between 7 and 10 years, something that I wanted to like think about each into asset individually, you know, and so that was one of the things that I looked at. And then obviously properties that if I can get 5 years cash flow up front, I'll totally hold that property and keep it. It's not worth me selling. So really that's how I analyzed everything and separated everything into, what makes sense to keep and what makes sense to sell. Because not everything is worth selling at this point.
Yeah. Bree, I appreciate the feedback.
Yeah.
And just, I think there are how many, 24 participants. I met Bree last year at the Midwest Networking Summit. I haven't seen a better networking event. It was, I think, on a Saturday and a Sunday with John, Bree, and a couple of other folks. There isn't a better networking summit for young professionals, seasoned investors, especially folks who are trying to get into multifamily and in different asset classes. So I
Yeah.
appreciate the event you organize. I think it's the third time this year, I believe, or the fourth time in
Third
Chicago.
time.
Yeah,
And
third time.
we just made the decision to make it we didn't make the decision. It's a virtual only event this year.
Yeah.
So we really had wanted to do, because the networking is such a huge part of these sort of events. And that's, half the reason you go. Speakers are great. We have some amazing speakers this year. David Green is coming. Eddie Wilson, who's the CEO of Think Realty, is speaking. Who else? We have Brian Burke, Jake and Gino. We have some amazing speakers this year. But we worked really hard on figuring out how are we still going to do the networking. So we're using an event app, which lets you before, during, and after the event. You can do in-app messages. There's community forums. You can do virtual coffee breaks. We have virtual coffee breaks set up throughout the event. So it'll be similar to the breakout rooms that John did previously. There'll be different rooms on different topics. If you want to talk about syndication or wholesaling, whatever it is, there'll be different rooms set up to have those sort of discussions throughout the event. So we're trying our best to still maintain that level of networking and still have some great speakers.
Thank you so much, Brie.
Yeah. So Michael Rose had a question. How are these small business investments you're thinking about structured? Are you thinking of a purely financial investment or a controlling interest? That's a really good question, Michael. I'm still learning. So I'm very, very lucky that my old roommate used to do asset-based lending for First Midwest Bank. So about 15 years ago, I had this idea of buying a dog walking business. I really hated my job before I even got into real estate. Was like, I need to do something else. And I, was on, this was 15 years ago. So this was, Craigslist days. And found, like, I love animals. There was a local dog walking business that was offering, was being sold. And I was like, great, I'm going to buy this dog walking business. And then she explained to me like that the valuation is really hard to do because it's 100% based on their service contracts. So if the contract is based on that person providing that service. So that's not a guarantee moving forward. There's no actual assets that you're buying. You're essentially buying a client list. And that client list can go to shit real quick. So how to value that sort of, she was really overvaluing what she wanted to sell the asset business for. And then my friend explained to me that, like, you're still doing all the work though. It's like, you're going to need to do marketing. You're going to gain new clients. You're going to need to hire dog walkers. Like, this is going to be a full-time job for you, not really an investment. So when I started considering looking at asset-based businesses now, or businesses in general, she was my first call, obviously. So whenever I come across something that I'm interested in, she's going to help me value it and put a number to it. But I do not want another job. So where I'm really strong at, accounting, planning, like business operations. I'm really strong at sitting in my pajamas all day in front of a computer yelling at people. That's what I like to do. I don't like to, not that I don't like, I don't want to actually have to drive somewhere and like run a business day to day. So the business that I'm interested in currently is a junk removal company. They've been established for about 10 years. They've got a really good reputation. The owner is fantastic at the customer service, the day-to-day operations, and the marketing. Where I could step in is maybe to work on some business efficiencies and then offer more capital to expand the business in terms of marketing, operations, trucks, and that sort of aspect. So like my situation with him as we're starting these conversations is, I want to see you maybe once a quarter. Like, that's my goal. I don't want to be talking to you every single day. Like, you've already run a very successful business. I don't want to really be involved with that part of things. I don't want to, come into the office and tell your employees what to do or how to schedule or anything of that. But if I gave you capital and we were able to buy more trucks, like, how could we expand and double or triple your volume? So like, that's where my interest lies with that. Does that answer your question, Michael?
Yes, and you might consider finding a nonprofit board around the Chicago area.
How so?
I was a part of this group back in Oklahoma that worked with people with disabilities, but I was brought in as a board member. And that took me away from the individual day-to-day management. I've done door knocking in the past. It's not fun. I like sitting in air conditioning. This was more of a chance to, actually sit in the boardroom, the CEO, with the president of the board, with bankers, with people, and just talk about what are our existing revenue streams? How do you increase it? What's our donor base? how do you expand it? But without, and I like that I could get involved with that without putting in, $5-6 million down, because as a college student, I did not have $5-6 million.
Mhm.
As a college graduate, I do not have $5-6 million.
I don't think anyone here does.
Um,
So we're good.
just wanting to, if you're just wanting to, see that that's what you want to do, nonprofit could be a zero cost way to explore that.
Well, I want to invest. I mean, I want to get a return on the capital that I have.
Right.
It's a matter of figuring it out. And one thing I think that coronavirus has taught a lot of us is the importance of diversification. Not having all your eggs in one basket. For us landlords, me and John, I know, we're residential landlords. We really didn't get hit very bad. There was a slight decrease in rent payments, but generally speaking, most of us landlords operationally have been the same. But if you're a hotel operator, if you did Airbnb, if you were in commercial assets with small business, mixed use properties that had, small retail or strip malls, you're in big trouble. Our neighbors own a Hooters, which is hilarious because they're like 80-year-old Greek people. So I'm surprised they own a Hooters. But they're telling us that the Hooters hasn't paid rent in 3 months because they've been closed. So if all your eggs are in that one basket, and something like coronavirus, which obviously I don't think any one of us anticipated, happens, then you're in a bad position. So diversification has really been top of mind to me moving forward, and how I can protect myself from future situations. I like this. So I'm reading your I love the idea of wraparound services for your buildings. Also consider storage supplement services business. So self-storage. Oh, did that just go away? Sorry. Self-storage is an area that has been super popular for the last 5 years. When it's super popular, everyone's talking about it, it makes me really nervous. So that's why I don't like large commercial multifamily. I think that the area is way too oversaturated. We've seen cap rates be compressed over the last couple of years. So self-storage is something that a lot of people are very, very gung-ho about. I like the concept of it, but I just don't know, when you're in some sort of economic recession and you're struggling to make your car payment, if all that crap is in storage and you haven't needed it for the last 2 years, are you really going to pay to keep it there?
What I also, and just to build on that a little bit, Brie, sorry, kind of just in time emergency situations. Like I've had a couple closings go awry last minute because the person moving truck didn't show up in time. So they have all this stuff they need to move, and there's a hiccup while they can't get it out of the house. And of course, buyers want to come in immediately, right?
Of course.
So if you could do like a temporary short storage, like, hey, 2 days,
Pods.
3 days, something like a premium, right? Like a pod, but quick. And or we called one of the junks people, and they came and cleared the place out with 2 hours notice. We had to pay a premium for that. Right? But it's still, it was under $500. It was under $500 with a premium service. So thinking about junk services, et cetera, kind of these wraparound services for both as a landlord or a seller or anybody who owns actually real property, I think could be lucrative, as well as your one business is kind of supporting each other, right? But it's not
that's actually a good idea.
Diversification, but it's still also a great structuring where you're supporting your businesses.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. And I was actually just talking with someone today who was looking at getting into boat and RV storage, or something else, buying a large plot of land, middle of nowhere, Wisconsin, Woodstock, somewhere out there. Because I know when I had a boat on Lake Michigan, the cost to winterize and store our boat was like $7,000 for the year, because we had a facility that was close by. So if they come pick it up, drive it out there, I don't care if it's 5 hours away, I'm not the one driving, might be a good opportunity as well. But it's definitely something that, I'm looking to expand my knowledge base, and that's a new endeavor for me. Now with the market currently, so I don't know if any of y'all have experienced this, the buyer's market when coronavirus happened, like it stopped. In the city of Chicago, we weren't allowed to show tenant occupied units, which my whole business is apartment buildings. So it became very difficult. There wasn't a lot of listings, and the ones that were, it was very hard to show. So we just in June opened it up where we can now show tenant occupied units, and business has been incredibly busy. It's like there was a 3-month pause, and then everyone that was paused for the last 3 months decided to start looking in June. So I know Anthony was talking about, he had what, 10 closings today? Yeah, it's been absolutely insane with this current market. I like to work less. What's the work less, make more, right? But there's a word for a word analogy for that. But I've been working like legit 5 o'clock in the morning till 7 o'clock at night the last couple weeks, because I've just been so incredibly busy with clients looking at properties. We've had more go under contract in the last 30 days than we have in the last 9 months combined. There's another question. Did you find that any size property performed worse, for instance, duplex, triplex, or quad? No. So my Milwaukee properties are the ones that I sold, not my Chicago properties. And Milwaukee properties tend to be they're C-class assets. The weird thing that happens, at least with my properties, is when one tenant goes, both tenants go. And like when one building starts to have a downturn, the whole, it just spreads throughout the building. So one example would be I had a 6-unit property. I had a 6-unit property, and my property manager had placed a less than desired tenant. He was letting his cousin or someone was coming over all the time and smoking, and was just a downright degenerate. And within 6 months, we lost 5 units. Every other tenant moved out of that building because of one bad placement. And that building was quite stabilized for 3 years. That completely decimated our business. And then we had to evict that tenant, and so no one would really move in until they were gone. So that whole process cost me almost 1.5 years of cash flow. But then I noticed that 3 years prior, we also had a similar incident, not because of a tenant, but all of a sudden tenants just stopped paying and left. So for that building in particular, we just decided to sell. So there wasn't a set reasoning. There wasn't a set asset class or unit size or anything like that that really contributed to it. There was just certain buildings for some reason that over that 5, 6, 7 year period just constantly had problems, and we couldn't keep good tenants. I also have buildings that I've had for 7 years that have the original tenants. We've never had any problems. There's no rhyme or reason.
Hey, Brie, as a kind of a follow-up to that, because I know I'd asked you earlier today a little bit about the same question. I guess my curiosity as you look to prune your portfolio was there anything were some of these not purpose-built, were there converted commercial spaces, were they strange properties that didn't perform, or were they they were just good properties, they just, for whatever reason, they were dogs for a couple of years?
For whatever reason, they were dogs for a couple of years. All of our properties are generally, we've got 2 to 6 unit properties in Milwaukee, all normal residential assets. And I don't know what it is. And we even had properties that were, 3 blocks away from one that's great performing, and then this one's not. So I don't know what the deal is, but we just couldn't. And it really comes down to tenants. The tenants are the ones that are either going to pay or not pay, and damage or not damage the properties. So yeah, for, just no reason that I can think of were some just performing and some weren't.
As a quick follow-up to that, do you think that management was one of the main issues was that the issue with the tenant placement, or was it just luck of the draw? Occasionally you get a bad apple in a C-class area.
I think occasionally you get a bad apple in a C-class area. Let's see.
If anybody else had any more questions, feel free to either chime in or, message.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear why self-storage took a small hit. Okay, so another question. As you started investing out of state, would you recommend Chicago as a good investment market? And what are some of the things you say to keep in mind? So Chicago's a great market, right? But Chicago and Milwaukee, there's A, B, C, and D class assets, right? So Doesn't matter what market you go into, there's different asset classes, and that's going to determine what your strategy is. I felt comfortable at the time when I invested in Chicago. My assets are all on the north side of Chicago. So generally A, B type assets, moderate cash flow, more appreciation based. When I was looking for more cash flow based investments, I honestly didn't even think to really look in Chicago. Like if I would have known about the Berwyn-Cicero area where John invests, I could have had my assets close to home and still gotten similar returns. But I didn't know that that was possible here, really. I just found bigger pockets. So that's when, you have to understand, I had never read an investing book or talked to an investor in my entire life until Thanksgiving of 2014. And by February of 2015, so 3 months later, I was already looking at Milwaukee with agents. So this whole world of investing out of state just came up, and Milwaukee seemed to be the market that we looked at. That being said, now I probably would have considered other markets within the Chicagoland area versus going to Milwaukee. Milwaukee is great. I love it. It's very, very tenant or landlord friendly, but investing from a distance can be very difficult. And it's definitely been a drawback. While I have a great property manager, I've gone through 4. So in the beginning, I was having to drive back and forth like once a week to manage property managers. I was even, twice a month spending the night in Milwaukee so I could handle things in part of the business. So the first few years were very, very labor intensive, getting the business up to a point. It wasn't until I found a property manager that was competent and that I trusted that could take over the business that I stopped having to go to Milwaukee all the time. If that was only a, half an hour drive for me, and I was investing in Berwyn-Cicero, the south side of Chicago, which have cash flow based assets, it would have been a lot easier of a process for me. I just didn't even think to really look for it, to be honest.
Thank you, Brie.
And some other things to keep in mind, whether you're investing locally or out of state, if you're doing what we would call a cash flow based market, if you're seeing numbers that are like 9-10% cap rates, that's a cash flow based market. That is a C or D class asset. There's no way you're going to get a 10% cap rate in an A, B type market. So when you're dealing with those kind of markets, it's a huge struggle. One of the biggest struggles really is property management. Your property manager will make or break your asset. And one of the things that I personally feel very strongly about is whether you're investing 5 miles away or 100 miles away, whatever it may be, you have to have good property managers. And the issue is, if John has a duplex and I have 96 units with my property manager and we both have a vacancy, guess who's getting rented first? I am. I have the properties with my property manager. I have got the scale to dictate, right, when things should be done. So when I was buying in the Milwaukee market, I bought from a lot of out-of-state investors, and I always called them after we bought the deal. Gave them a week or two, called them up and said, hey, listen, I'm a new investor in the area. I wanted to get your experience. The deal's done. You've already sold it to me. Like, can't go back. What's that? No Indian giver, stuff. But why did you sell? And what I kept hearing over and over again was they really had problems with management. It was really, really hard to find property managers. And again, when you only have 1 or 2 properties, you're nothing to that property manager. But when I represent 20% of their business, and I call them and tell them, I need you to stop what you're doing and handle the situation, you better believe that they do. So getting to that scale of property manager, to me, that number is 20. Like if you've got 20 units with the property manager, like you mean something to them. You're going to call, they're going to pick up your phone call. So when you're considering buying out of state, I think you should have the capabilities to get to about 20 units within the first year to 2. That would be my goal. Did that answer your question?
Can I just pop in and say, West Urban Management only does small properties. So we want your 2, 3, 4, 6, 8 unit building.
Just one?
Just one building? Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I found it impossible to find good property managers who can handle a small amount. But are you dealing with like C-class assets or B-type assets?
It's a niche. Not everyone wants to do it. I understand why. But
yeah, it's hard to make money. I mean, there's 3 things I would hate doing in life. I could never be a teacher. I could never be a nanny. and I could never be a property manager. Like, absolute, you know, I don't know. I would rather be picking strawberries for 14 hours a day in 100-degree heat than being a property manager. It is a very tough business. You guys get hit on both ends, from the owner who doesn't have realistic expectations
No one likes us.
to the tenant. No, you guys do a great job. It's just a really
No, no one likes us.
it's a very hard job. So yeah, I said, like, but to make money, property managers have to have scale, right? And that's where it becomes difficult. So yeah, finding, like I said, finding a good property manager will absolutely make or break your investment opportunity. Michael, thought, what? Was there a question?
No, I can wait.
Oh, there was
Is
a
there another
question.
question, yeah.
Thoughts on senior living? I have no idea. I wish I was that smart, Michael, to understand the senior living opportunities. In theory, with all the baby boomers, it makes a lot of sense. I just wouldn't even know how to tackle that industry.
May I say something real quick?
Sure.
With senior living, something to consider right now, the lawsuits on mistreatment and malpractice of seniors during COVID is through the roof. Even like all the people that handle nursing home care, et cetera, illness, all of that, it is through the roof. I don't know. You better hope they have the right liability insurance right now, because it's going to be class actions. It's pretty bad right now. So it's not to say it doesn't have a niche and there's not space for it, but from the legal standpoint, it's an overwhelmed market right now for people to even take cases. So they're only taking cases in which some people have basically died or are dying.
So that's what I was thinking, was that you have this entire industry that, especially through COVID, is just being decimated. I mean, yeah, the horribly managed facilities, probably very liable for illness and deaths of senior people, but that's got to create a lot of owners who want to sell those assets. And if you can just, I mean, even not even fill them for a year and just sit on it and wait for this to end, the deal might be so low that the numbers might make sense, just because people want to liquidate out of that senior facility, right? Like, there's so much of a liability. What will you sell it for?
Yeah, that might be opportunity. I mean, it will depend on how things go this winter. But even said, when, you know, Chicago, we had right in the beginning of coronavirus was our primary elections. So I live in Lincolnwood, and they sent me an email the morning of the primaries and said, normally we hold our primaries at the senior living facility, but because of safety concerns, we're moving the location today. I'm like, why would you hold it in the middle of flu season at a senior living community in the first place? Like, that's the most susceptible place, and it's the middle, like, this is February, it was early March. So we'll see. There's going to be a lot of different impacts with coronavirus, and a lot of things that we have not even thought about yet. So that's why I'm really excited about the summit coming up in July, because it's right when we're starting to see the trickle down of what's happening. And I know a lot of the speakers, so Brian Burke, he just wrote a book for Bigger Pockets. Absolutely love Brian, phenomenal speaker. And he originally committed to talking about the market uncertainty. So when we were recommitting speakers for the new dates, I'd ask him, like, are you sure you want to take this topic on? He's like, I'm even more excited than before to take this topic on. You know, every single speaker, it's going to be part of every single conversation about what should we be doing. You know, I've spent every week I'm on a different webinar trying to learn, you know, hey, like, what should I be looking for? You know, how should I be planning my business differently? How should I be pivoting my business moving forward? Where's the opportunity going to be? So that's one of the things that I'm personally more excited to learn about from the summit coming up in July, is what's next. What are the next steps for people? You know, small business is going to be, I think, an opportunity, but it's going to depend. You know, I would not want to invest in a restaurant business. You know, that would be my worst nightmare. Unfortunately, my husband is, you know, a sommelier and spent 10, 20 years in the restaurant business, and that's what his dream is to open up a restaurant right now. So we've had lots of internal discussions about it, and I'm trying to get him on a different path than that idea, because I think that would be awful right now. But that's where his passion lies. So it's, you know, it's going to be a work in progress. We're going to see how things go. You know, how the election impacts things as well. Another question, what are my thoughts on house hacking? Any tips for a new investor? So house hacking has been a really interesting business in the last 18 months. So prior to July of last year, we had this phenomenal loan program, which was a 5% down loan program. We did it, 99% of our house hacking clients did this program. It was great. Everyone loved it. It was super easy. We did a ton of business. Everyone was happy. And then they changed their income requirements, which essentially decimated that product, that loan program in my market at least. So our business completely dropped off a cliff because now we were stuck with a 20% down financing option or 3.5% down FHA option. So you think, you know, FHA 3.5% down, that's not a bad deal. Problem though is, again, in the areas that I work on the north side of Chicago, a big problem for us is loan limits. So maybe only 25% of the properties that we analyze that the numbers work are eligible for FHA based on their loan limits. On top of that, FHA also has a self-sufficiency test, which is for 3 and 4 unit properties, which knocks out about 90% of those options. So for every, you know, 20 properties that cash flowed, one of them would work for FHA. And it really affected our business over the last year. So actually, John and I were just talking, about 2 weeks ago, John, about what we're going to do because, you know, we're between a rock and a hard place with not very many options. And most house hackers look to use low money down programs to benefit from the low interest rates and the favorable terms from owner occupying. Well, that very day, I got a phone call about a new loan program that's a 10% down loan program. It's through a credit union. It's got rates under 4%. It's 10% down. It works with no loan limits, any property over $800 or under $825,000. And it was like a complete light switch, and it completely flipped our business because it opened up and it filled a gap between FHA and the 20% down program. And that's why we've been so busy the last couple of weeks. You know, we've written more offers in the last 2 weeks than we have in the last 9 months. It's just been every day our offers have been going out on these properties for this awesome new loan program. So house hacking has, sorry, I'm reading the comments. House hacking has really been opened up in the last couple of weeks, especially now that there's options out there. So Michael said he's studying to be a sommelier and his laptop's dying, so he had to go. No, it's not the home possible loan is the loan that at least died in our area. So for my average price points between $600,000 and $700,000. So we can't do that sort of program here with the income restrictions.
JR asked an interesting follow-up question. He asked if there are caps on the credits you can request. So that's a common strategy I know all of us do, where you try to get something under contract and get credits.
I didn't ask for the 10% down program, but we've got one under contract right now for $625,000. We had built in a $10,000 closing cost credit on it, and we're going for a repair credit right now, and the lender told us to cap it at $5,000. So $15,000 credit on a $625,000 property. But he said you can reach out to me, John, both of us have contacts within that loan program if you're interested.
So essentially there is a cap somewhere around 4 or 5% of the 10% down is what you could negotiate.
I'll have to ask. I don't know. He didn't tell me if there was a specific number. He just said keep it under 5.
Right. Okay.
Any other questions?
Last question is there. Why should investors look at Chicagoland? Because property taxes are going up. I don't know what he's talking about. Evictions are getting harder, and there's a population decline.
Well, Chicago is the fucking baller city of the United States. That's why. So population decline. I'm gonna rant on this one because I think that is complete bullshit. You can't, I absolutely hate when people look at Chicago stats and then say that's applicable in the entire city of Chicago. Chicago's huge. It's 294 square miles. So for you to say the entire city of Chicago population is declining, that's not necessarily true. Areas of Chicago are declining, areas of Chicago are increasing, but there's also more going on to that story. So the example I always like to give is, if anyone knows where North Center is in Chicago, North Center is a quite prominent neighborhood. It's where all the professional athletes live for their kids to go to school. It's got one of the top schools in the entire area. It's a really tiny little area. Irving, Western, Lincoln, Addison, between those corners. Well, North Center has the fastest declining population in the city of Chicago. Why? Like, why would that? Doesn't make any sense. So the reason being is, I have a house in North Center that we bought 6 years ago. When we bought that house in North Center, our block of about 40 houses was 35 small apartment buildings, 2 to 4 units, very prominent in Chicago, and 5 single family houses. Well, then someone very, very smart around 2014 figured out that you can buy a 2 to 4 unit that needs work for $100,000 less than you can buy a single family that needs work. Now you can completely deconvert that building, put a couple $100,000 into it, and sell it for 1.6 million. And the inventory was so small for single family houses that were rehabbed. These properties were going off the market in a matter of 3 days, over asking price, cash offers. It was insane. So 2014, 2015, 2016 was complete gangbusters. We were seeing deconversions all over the place. But then we changed the supply and demand. Now everyone jumped on the bandwagon, started doing all these deconversions, and now these properties have been sitting. But it caused a rapid decline in population because on a building or a block that had 40 buildings, where 35 were apartment buildings, now only 10 are apartment buildings. The rest are all single family houses. So it's contributing to the decline in population in that neighborhood. Now, it took years for the alderman all of a sudden started saying like, oh my God, there's no affordable housing. Well, what did you think was gonna happen when you started deconverting all these apartment buildings? Like, duh. And now they're trying to backtrack and create more affordable housing in the neighborhood. But that's the reason why they have a fast declining population. That's not taken into consideration when we're looking at all these blanket statistics. So I think it really depends on a more granular level. And you have to take that into consideration.
Awesome. Brie, thank you so much for presenting today. I think we
Awesome.
could probably wrap it up here. Thanks everybody for coming.
Thank
And
you.
I
Thank
hope
you.
you guys enjoyed this. We are potentially going to be in person next month, so just keep monitoring. We'll see how coronavirus does, right? So we're tracking it, and we're also waiting for the bar there in Forest Park to give me the green light to go back to in person. But no matter what, now that we've done Zoom, we will always have a Zoom component, even when we go back to in person. So for all my out-of-state folks or people that are traveling, we're going to try to add Zoom in when we go back to in-person meetups. So cool. Thanks again, everybody, for coming. And I will talk to you all soon. Yeah.
Thank you, John.
Thanks. Take care.
Mhm.